I received an email from my daughter Madison on a quiet Tuesday morning. The subject line read, "Important Wedding Update." Opening it, I discovered she was uninviting me from her Paris wedding because I don't speak French and would embarrass her in front of her future French in-laws. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my coffee growing cold. Just 3 months ago, I'd written a check for $160,000 to cover her dream Parisian wedding. Now, my own daughter considers me an embarrassment. The morning that email arrived, I sat in my kitchen for hours, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. My name is Atlas, and at 67 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life to avoid being blindsided. But nothing prepares you for rejection from your own child. Madison had always been the light of my life. After my wife Eleanor passed when Madison was 12, it was just the two of us. I threw myself into being both mother and father, attending every school event, learning to braid hair from YouTube videos, and somehow managing to guide her through teenage years without major catastrophe. When she graduated from Columbia University, summa cum laude, I cried harder than when we buried Eleanor. My little girl had made it. Everything changed 18 months ago at a charity gala in Manhattan. I'd bought a table for my construction company Atlas Built, which I'd grown from a one-man operation to a firm employing over 200 people. Madison accompanied me, looking stunning in an emerald dress Eleanor would have loved. That's where she met Pierre Dubois. Pierre worked as an investment banker for Beaumont and Associates, a French firm with offices in New York. Tall, perfectly groomed, with an accent that made everything sound important. He swept Madison off her feet immediately. Within minutes of introduction, he was telling stories about growing up in Paris, summers at his family's vineyard, and his parents' connections to French society. I watched my daughter transform before my eyes. Her laugh became softer, more controlled. She started holding her wine glass differently. By the end of the evening, she was attempting to pronounce French words Pierre taught her, giggling when she got them wrong. "He's incredible, Dad," she gushed on the drive home. "Did you hear him talking about the ambassador's dinner his parents hosted? Can you imagine that life?" I could imagine it, but what I saw in my rearview mirror worried me more. My daughter's face glowing not just with attraction, but with aspiration. She wasn't just falling for Pierre. She was falling for the idea of becoming someone else. Their relationship moved at lightning speed. Within 2 months, Madison was spending every weekend at Pierre's Tribeca apartment. She started shopping at different stores, replacing her comfortable wardrobe with structured blazers and silk scarves. Her speech patterns changed, peppered with phrases like "how gauche" and "c'est la vie." The proposal came 6 months later. Pierre flew her to Paris for her birthday, getting down on one knee at the top of the Eiffel Tower, just as the lights began their hourly sparkle. Madison called me from Charles de Gaulle Airport, sobbing with joy. "Daddy, it was perfect, like a movie. And the ring. Oh my God. It belonged to his grandmother. She was a countess or something. Can you believe I'm going to marry into French aristocracy?" I congratulated her, pushing down the unease in my chest. That night, I looked at the photo she texted, her hand sporting a vintage sapphire surrounded by diamonds, the Eiffel Tower glittering behind them. My daughter looked happy, but also different. Polished, curated, like she was playing a role. The wedding planning began immediately. Madison had very specific visions. It had to be at Château de Villette, the same venue where they filmed parts of the Da Vinci Code. It had to have crystal chandeliers, a string quartet from the Paris Conservatory, and catering from a Michelin-starred chef. "How much are we talking about, sweetheart?" I asked during one of our planning lunches. She bit her lip, a gesture from childhood when she wanted something big. "Pierre's family has connections, so we can get discounts, but probably around 160,000. I know it's a lot. But Daddy, this is my dream. Mom always said I should have a fairy tale wedding." The mention of Eleanor sealed it. I wrote the check that afternoon. What I didn't expect was how that gesture would mark the beginning of my exclusion from my daughter's new life. The changes accelerated. Madison enrolled in French cooking classes, but never invited me to taste her creations. She joined a wine society, focused on French vintages, replacing our tradition of Sunday football and beer. When I suggested we take a father-daughter trip before the wedding, she declined, saying she needed to use all her vacation days to visit Pierre's family. 3 weeks before the wedding that email arrived, I decided to surprise Madison at her apartment. I wanted to discuss some wedding logistics and maybe bridge the growing distance between us. Using the spare key she didn't know I still had, I let myself in, planning to wait with coffee and pastries from her favorite bakery. That's when I saw it. A certificate on her bookshelf partially hidden behind a photo of her and Pierre. Advanced French language certification. 2 years of study. My stomach dropped. 2 years. She'd been learning French for 2 years and never mentioned it once. When Madison emerged from her bedroom, finding me studying the certificate, her face went through several expressions. Surprise, guilt, then defiance. "Dad, you scared me. You should have called first." 2 years of French lessons. I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She shrugged, moving to the kitchen. "Pierre thought it would be good for me to learn. His family doesn't speak much English. I could have learned with you. Could be helpful for the wedding." The laugh that escaped her wasn't cruel exactly, but it was dismissive in a way that cut deep. "Dad, you're 67. You still use your phone like it's a walkie-talkie. French would be impossible for you. It's one of the hardest languages to master, especially pronunciation. Pierre says I'm barely passable after 2 years. I managed to build a $20 million company without speaking French," I said quietly. Madison's face softened slightly. "I didn't mean it like that. You're brilliant at what you do. But this is different. Pierre's world is different. The wedding guests will be diplomats, wine merchants, people who summer in Saint-Tropez. They discuss art and philosophy. You're more comfortable talking about concrete mixture and building codes. Is that such a bad thing?" She sighed, pouring coffee for both of us. At least, that hadn't changed. "Of course not. But Daddy, this wedding is my chance to show them I belong in their world. That I'm not just some American girl Pierre picked up. His ex-girlfriend was the daughter of a senator in France. She spoke 4 languages and played violin with their national symphony. And you're a Columbia graduate who runs a nonprofit literacy program," I reminded her. "You don't need to compete with anyone." But I could see in her eyes that my words weren't reaching her. Madison had already decided who she needed to become, and that person's father wasn't a construction worker from Brooklyn who'd made good. That person's father was an embarrassment to be managed, not a man to be proud of. I left her apartment that day, with a heavy heart, not knowing that in just a few weeks, she would make her feelings official in writing. The French certification stayed burned in my memory. 2 years of secrecy, 2 years of transformation I wasn't invited to witness. Looking back, I should have seen the email coming. Every ignored dinner invitation, every excuse for missing our traditions, every subtle correction of my pronunciation. They were all preparing me for exile from her new existence. My daughter was building a new life, and like any construction project, sometimes you have to clear away the old foundation first. I just never imagined I'd be the debris she needed to remove. 3 weeks before the wedding, Madison called with another request. She needed an additional $40,000 for enhanced floral arrangements and upgraded champagne selections. Her voice carried that practiced nonchalance I'd noticed developing whenever money came up. "The florist showed me these extraordinary orchid installations," she explained. Pierre's mother specifically mentioned loving orchids in her last letter, and the champagne situation. Pierre noticed they'd selected a mid-tier vintage. Can you imagine serving Moët when the Dubois family owns vineyards? I agreed to drop off a check that afternoon. Part of me hoped it might give us a chance to talk, to reconnect before the wedding. Madison mentioned she'd be at physical therapy for her yoga injury until 4, so I should just leave the check on her counter. I arrived at 3:30, using my spare key to enter her apartment. The place smelled like expensive candles and fresh lilies. Another new addition. Photos of Madison and Pierre covered every surface, all professionally staged-looking shots from their travels. Santorini, Monaco, Aspen. When had my daughter become someone who vacationed in Monaco? I just placed the check on the marble counter when I heard Madison's voice from the bedroom. She must have come home early. I was about to announce myself when I realized she was on speakerphone, and Pierre's accented voice filled the space. "Chérie, we must finalize the seating arrangements today. Mother is quite particular about these things." "I know," Madison sighed. "I've reorganized it 3 times. Your family at the main tables, obviously. The Bernardins, the Lawrence, all your parents circle near the front." "And your family?" There was a pause. I stood frozen in the kitchen, knowing I should leave but unable to move. "Pierre, I'm worried about my father." Madison's voice dropped. "He's sweet, but he's a construction worker. He owns the company now, yes, but at heart, he's still the guy who poured concrete foundations. Your parents own vineyards and host diplomatic dinners. My dad wears flannel shirts and tells stories about building strip malls." My chest tightened. Each word hit like a physical blow. Pierre's laugh was light, but cruel. "Americans do have a certain rustic charm. Perhaps we could seat him at a separate table, away from my family with your other American guests." "It's not just the seating," Madison continued. "Last week he asked if there would be beer at the reception. Beer at Chateau de Villette. And he still thinks Olive Garden is fancy dining. Remember when I told you about his favorite restaurant? It's a steakhouse where they let you throw peanut shells on the floor." They both laughed. My hands started shaking. "I'm honestly thinking of just uninviting him." Madison said the words coming out in a rush. "We could say there's a French-only policy or something. Make it about language, not about what he is. He's already paid for everything, so the wedding happens either way." "That might be kindest," Pierre agreed. "To avoid embarrassment for everyone. Your father seems like a good man, but this is not his world. My parents' friends would not understand him." "God remember when he met you." Madison's voice turned mocking. "He tried to do that aggressive American handshake thing, and he kept calling you Peter, even after I corrected him twice." I backed out of the apartment as silently as I'd entered, my legs unsteady. In my truck, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. My daughter, the little girl I'd raised alone, who I'd read bedtime stories to every night, who I'd taught to ride a bike in Prospect Park, was ashamed of me. The construction worker, the embarrassment, the man who didn't belong in Pierre's world. I drove for hours, ending up at the cemetery where Eleanor was buried. I sat by her headstone as the sun set, talking to my wife like I still did sometimes. "She's ashamed of me, our Madison. Remember when she used to brag to her friends that her daddy built half of Brooklyn? Now I'm something to hide." The wind rustled through the oak trees Eleanor had loved. I could almost hear her voice. "Then show her who Atlas really is." That evening, back in my home office, I stared at photos covering the walls. Madison at 5 wearing my hard hat at a construction site. At 10, helping me blueprint her dream treehouse. At 16, cutting the ribbon at the youth center I'd built. At 22, hugging me at her Columbia graduation, whispering, "We did it, Daddy." When had that proud girl become someone who mocked her father with her fiancé? When had achievements built with calloused hands become something shameful? 2 days later, the email arrived. Madison had clearly spent time crafting it, using what she probably thought was diplomatic language. "Dear Dad, I hope this finds you well. After much consideration, Pierre and I have decided to limit our wedding attendance to French-speaking guests only. This will ensure all attendees can fully participate in the ceremony and reception, which will be conducted entirely in French. I know you'll understand this is about creating the most cohesive experience for our guests. Your presence, while personally meaningful to me, might create discomfort, as you wouldn't be able to engage with other attendees or understand the proceedings. Your generous financial contribution has made this dream wedding possible, and I'm forever grateful. I'll make sure to share photos and videos so you can experience the day from afar. With love, Madison. I read it 3 times each, reading revealing new layers of cruelty wrapped in polite words. Your presence, while personally meaningful to me, as if I were some distant relative she felt obligated to mention. Create discomfort, because apparently, my existence was now uncomfortable. The worst part was the signature. Not your daughter or your Madison, like she used to sign birthday cards. Just Madison. Like I was a business associate being gently fired. I sat in my study surrounded by 25 years of memories and felt something inside me shift. The hurt was still there, sharp and deep, but underneath it, something else stirred. Not anger exactly, but determination. Madison thought she knew who her father was. A simple construction worker who'd gotten lucky someone to hide from sophisticated society. But there was more to Atlas than flannel shirts and concrete stories. It was time my daughter learned exactly who she'd chosen to betray. That night, I made 2 phone calls. First to Harold Fitzgerald, my lawyer for 30 years. Harold, I need to know exactly what my options are regarding the wedding contracts. Atlas, it's 10 at night. Is everything all right? No, I said simply, but it will be. The second call was to Samuel Morrison, the private investigator who'd helped me with corporate due diligence over the years. Sam, I need you to look into someone. Pierre Dubois, claims to be from French aristocracy. I want to know everything. Personal matter? Sam asked, hearing something in my voice. The most personal. I hung up and poured myself a scotch. The good stuff Eleanor and I saved for special occasions. This qualified. My daughter thought she could erase me from her life after taking my money remake herself into someone whose father wasn't worth knowing. She was about to learn that you can't build a new foundation without properly demolishing the old one. And nobody knew more about demolition than a construction worker from Brooklyn. The grandfather clock Eleanor had inherited chimed midnight. In 3 weeks, Madison expected to walk down an aisle in France, entering a new life where fathers like me didn't exist. I raised my glass to Eleanor's photo on the mantel. She wants to pretend I'm nobody. Let's see how that works out for her. The hurt was still there, might always be there. But Atlas didn't build his empire by letting people walk over him. Not competitors, not clients, and certainly not ungrateful daughters who'd forgotten where they came from. I didn't respond to Madison's email immediately. Instead, I sat in my home office staring at the words that effectively disowned me and made a decision. The old Atlas might have called her, might have begged, or raged, or tried to change her mind. But the hurt went too deep for that. This required strategy, not emotion. My first call the next morning was to Harold Fitzgerald. I'd known Harold since we were both hungry young men trying to make it in New York. He'd handled every contract for Atlas built, from my first residential project to the $40 million mall complex we'd completed last year. The wedding contracts, I said without preamble when his secretary put me through. Whose name are they in? Good morning to you too, Atlas, Harold said dryly. Give me a minute to pull the files. I heard typing, then a low whistle. Everything's in your name. Venue catering flowers, music photography, all of it. Madison's listed as the bride, but you're the contracting party. What about cancellation? 72 hours notice for most vendors, you'd recover about 80%. The venue is more complex. 48 hours for a 50% refund, but... He paused. Atlas, talk to me. What's going on? I forwarded him Madison's email. The silence that followed told me everything about Harold's opinion. Jesus Christ, he finally said. Your own daughter. Apparently I'm an embarrassment. Bad for the aesthetic. And she expects you to still pay for everything. Seems that way. Harold's voice turned professional, the tone I recognized from tough negotiations. You have options, legal ones. The contracts give you full control. But Atlas, I've known you 30 years. Are you sure you want to go nuclear? I don't know what I want yet, but I need information first, real information. Which brought me to my second call. Samuel Morrison had been NYPD for 20 years before going private. He specialized in corporate intelligence, but I knew he took personal cases for the right clients. We'd worked together when a competitor tried to sabotage one of my construction sites. Pierre Dubois, I told him. French national, works at Beaumont and Associates, dating my daughter. Claims his family owns vineyards, has diplomatic connections. I need to know if any of it's true. When do you need it? Yesterday. Rush job costs extra. Sam, my daughter, just uninvited me from the wedding I'm paying for because I'd embarrass her in front of his aristocratic family. Money's not the issue here. Give me a week, I'll find everything. While waiting for Sam's report, I did my own research. Not on Pierre. I'd leave that to the professionals, but on the wedding itself. I called Marguerite at Chateau de Villette, speaking English, with a carefully maintained working-class Brooklyn accent. Mr. Atlas, how wonderful to hear from you. Is everything prepared for the wedding? Actually, I had some questions about the arrangements. My daughter's been handling everything, but as the person writing the checks, I wanted to understand the details. Marguerite was professionally discreet, but helpful. She forwarded me copies of all correspondence, including recent emails from Pierre, trying to modify contracts. I noticed he'd been attempting to change payment methods, asking if deposits could be refunded to different accounts. He seems very involved, Marguerite said carefully. Most grooms leave such details to others. Has he been successful in any changes? No, monsieur. Everything requires your authorization. I thanked her and hung up pieces of a puzzle starting to form. Pierre wasn't just interested in marrying Madison. He was interested in controlling the money. 5 days later, Sam called. Can you meet? This is better discussed in person. We met at the same diner where we'd first worked together, a place that served real coffee and didn't care about atmosphere. Sam slid a folder across the cracked formica table. Your future son-in-law is quite the storyteller, he began. Pierre Dubois, age 32. He does work at Beaumont, but he's been a junior analyst for 8 months. Before that, he was unemployed for a year after being let go from his previous firm. I opened the folder, scanning documents and photos. What about the family? The vineyards? Sam actually laughed. His parents run a bakery, Boulangerie Dubois in Lyon. Good people from what I can tell. Working class, up at 3 every morning to bake bread. They own the building the bakery's in. That's their only real estate. No diplomatic connections, no aristocracy. His mother's cousin works at the mayor's office in Lyon. That's the closest they get to politics. Sam pulled out financial records. Here's where it gets interesting. Pierre's drowning in debt. Credit cards maxed out, 2 personal loans. He's been living like he has family money, but it's all borrowed. I studied the numbers, my construction-trained mind automatically calculating. Pierre owed nearly 60,000 euros with minimum payments, eating up most of his salary. There's more, Sam continued. I had my French associate do some digging. Pierre's been telling people in Paris that he's marrying American oil money. Apparently your daughter comes from a petroleum fortune, and you're some kind of Texas tycoon. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Both of them constructing elaborate lies about who they were, who their families were, each ashamed of their real background. His parents, I asked. Do they know about the wedding? That's the thing. He told them it's next month. My guess, he was hoping to get control of the wedding funds first, pay off some debts, then figure out the rest later. I closed the folder, mind racing. Madison wasn't just marrying a liar. She was marrying a con artist. But if I simply told her, would she believe me? She'd already chosen him over me. She'd interpret any attack on Pierre as jealousy or manipulation. No, this required a different approach. Madison needed to see the truth for herself, and Pierre needed to be exposed for who he really was. But most importantly, my daughter needed to learn the cost of being ashamed of where she came from. Sam, I need phone numbers. Pierre's parents, their bakery. He looked at me curiously. What are you planning? A wedding gift, the truth. That evening, I called France. It was morning in Lyon, and Madame Dubois answered on the third ring. My French was rusty but serviceable. Those 2 years in Quebec, during my hungry young days, were about to pay off. Madame Dubois, my name is Atlas. I'm Madison's father, your son's fiancé. Oh, her voice brightened immediately. The petroleum gentleman Pierre tells us such wonderful things. We are so excited for the wedding next month. My heart clenched at her genuine warmth. These people had no idea their son was weaving the same web of lies on both sides of the Atlantic. Actually, madame, I'm calling about that. There's been a change. The wedding is in 2 weeks, not next month. 2 weeks. But Pierre said, oh dear, we must rearrange everything. The bakery. I'd like to help with that. Would you and your husband accept my invitation to come early? I'll cover your flights and accommodation. It would mean so much to Madison to meet you before the wedding. She was nearly in tears with gratitude. We spoke for 20 minutes, and with each word, my resolve strengthened. These were good people, honest people who worked with their hands and took pride in it. Just like I used to before, my daughter decided that was shameful. After hanging up, I made a series of strategic calls. To Marguerite, confirming some adjustments to the wedding arrangements. To my bank authorizing specific payments. To 3 of my construction foremen who spoke French, asking if they'd like a free trip to Paris. Then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the storage unit, where I kept old photos and documents. In a dusty box, I found what I was looking for. Pictures from my Quebec construction days. Young Atlas, maybe 25 on site with my French-Canadian crew. Articles from local papers about the shopping complex we built. My certificate of appreciation from the Montreal Business Association. Presented entirely in French. Madison thought she knew her father. The simple construction worker who embarrassed her with his blue-collar ways. But there was more to my story, just as there was more to Pierre's. The difference was, I'd never been ashamed of my past. I pulled out one particular photo. Me and Eleanor on our honeymoon in Paris, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. She'd insisted we go there because she'd studied French in college and wanted to practice. I'd learned basic conversational French just to surprise her on the trip. She'd been so delighted when I ordered our anniversary dinner entirely in French, fumbling with pronunciation, but making the effort. Our daughter's lost her way, Elle, I said to the photo. But don't worry, I'll remind her who we are. Who she is. The plan was forming now, pieces clicking together like a well-designed blueprint. Madison wanted a sophisticated French wedding, where her embarrassing father wouldn't fit. She'd get exactly that. But not quite the way she imagined. I spent the rest of the evening making lists, checking contracts, arranging details. The construction worker in me understood that the best demolition was controlled demolition. You didn't just swing a wrecking ball wildly. You identified the load-bearing points and struck precisely. Madison and Pierre had built their relationship on a foundation of lies and shame. Time to show them what happened when you built on unstable ground. 2 weeks until the wedding. 2 weeks to prepare the most important construction project of my life. Not building something up, but carefully, methodically taking it down to the truth underneath. With 10 days until the wedding, I shifted into the kind of strategic planning that had built Atlas Construction from a one-truck operation into an empire. Every detail mattered. Every move had to be precise. My first priority was securing my position with the vendors. I called each one personally, confirming final payments and arrangements. To Marguerite at Château de Villette, I wired the remaining balance plus a generous bonus for her exceptional service. The same with the florist, the caterer, the musicians. Not only did I pay in full, but I included personal notes thanking them for accommodating my daughter's dreams. Monsieur Atlas, the caterer said, when he called to thank me, your generosity is most appreciated. If there is anything special you need for the wedding, please ask. Actually, I replied, there is one thing. Within days, I'd built a network of allies among the wedding vendors. Money talks, but respect and kindness shout. These people were now Team Atlas, whether they knew it or not. The next phase required more delicate handling. I flew to Paris, telling no one, checking into a modest hotel near the chateau. My cover story, if needed, was site inspection for a potential European expansion of Atlas Built. In reality, I was conducting reconnaissance. At Chateau de Villette, Marguerite greeted me warmly. Monsieur Atlas Madison did not mention you were coming. She doesn't know. I wanted to review everything personally, make sure my daughter has the perfect day. Marguerite gave me a private tour, and I noticed things that hadn't been in the correspondence. The wedding was set up to be aggressively French, even more than I'd imagined. Place cards in French only. Menu descriptions in French with no translations. The ceremony itself would be conducted entirely in French. This seems very exclusive, I commented. Marguerite's diplomatic smile wavered slightly. Your daughter and Monsieur Dubois were quite specific. They want an authentically French experience. And the American guests? We offered to provide translations, but they declined. Monsieur Dubois said it would compromise the atmosphere. I nodded thoughtfully, making mental notes. Then, I asked to see the final guest list and seating charts. What I found was illuminating. Madison and Pierre had segregated the guests completely. His side, supposedly French diplomats and vineyard owners, had the prime tables near the couple. My relatives and Madison's American friends were literally placed in a back corner, like children at the adults' Thanksgiving. My sister Carol and her husband Randy, who'd helped raise Madison after Eleanor died. My foreman Jake, who taught Madison to drive in his pickup truck. Madison's godmother Linda, who'd stepped in for every mother-daughter event through middle school. All relegated to Siberia because they didn't fit the aesthetic. Marguerite, I said carefully, I'd like to make some adjustments, as the host. She looked relieved. Of course, monsieur. What changes? We spent 2 hours reorganizing everything. When we finished, the seating was still elegant, but now integrated. The menu remained French, but included discreet English translations. The ceremony would have a bilingual officiant. One more thing, I added. The wine selection. I noticed they've chosen exclusively from the Bordeaux region. Oui, Monsieur Dubois was very particular about that. He said his family's connections. Let's add some variety. Include wines from Lyon, particularly anything from small family-owned vineyards. And perhaps some American wines as well, from New York State if possible. Marguerite made notes, then looked at me with newfound respect. You know more about wine than you let on, monsieur. I know about research. Amazing what you can learn when motivated. Back in New York, I put the next phase in motion. I called my core team, the men who'd helped build Atlas Construction from nothing. Jake, my first foreman. Tony, my equipment manager. Big Bill, who'd run concrete pours with me for 20 years. Boys, how'd you like a trip to Paris, all expenses paid? They thought I was joking until I explained. These were men who'd watched Madison grow up, who'd bounced her on their knees at company picnics. The hurt in their eyes when I told them about the email matched my own. She's ashamed of us, Jake asked, disbelief clear. I taught that girl to read blueprints when she was 8. She's forgotten who she is, I said. I aim to remind her. But the masterstroke came when dealing with Pierre's family. The Dubois parents had been overjoyed at my call, scrambling to rearrange their bakery schedule. I sent them first-class tickets, knowing Pierre had told them I was in petroleum. Let them enjoy the luxury. They'd earned it with their 4 a.m. bakery hours. I also hired a translator in Lyon to help me with a special project. The Dubois family bakery, it turned out, was beloved in their neighborhood. They'd been there 40 years through good times and bad. Their specialty was something called a croquembouche, a tower of cream puffs held together with caramelized sugar traditional at French celebrations. Could they make one for the wedding? I asked the translator. Monsieur, for their only son's wedding, they would be honored beyond words. I commissioned it immediately, arranging for it to be transported in a refrigerated truck. The proud parents would present their creation at their son's wedding, showing everyone what real French tradition looked like. Not from aristocrats, but from hard-working bakers who put love into every pastry. Meanwhile, Pierre was getting nervous. Marguerite forwarded me his increasingly frantic emails, asking about modifications to vendor contracts. He wanted to know about refund policies, whether deposits could be transferred, if there was wedding insurance he could claim. I instructed all vendors to respond identically. All changes must be approved by Monsieur Atlas. His desperation was showing. The wedding was in 5 days, and he couldn't access a penny of the money he'd been counting on. Madison must have been shielding him from the worst of it, but cracks were appearing. My lawyer Harold called with an interesting development. Someone tried to inquire about your financial status. Wanted to confirm your net worth, your company's value. Very clumsy attempt. My guess is Pierre hired a cheap investigator. Let me guess. He's trying to figure out if I'm really an oil tycoon. That would be my assumption. What should I tell them? The truth. That Atlas built is a construction company worth approximately $20 million. Let Pierre do the math on how that translates to petroleum billions. The final piece fell into place when I received a call from an unexpected source. Pierre's ex-girlfriend, Amélie Rousseau. Sam's investigation had uncovered her, and she'd heard through mutual friends about the wedding. Monsieur Atlas, I hope you'll forgive my intrusion. I dated Pierre for 2 years, and I feel you should know some things. We met at a quiet cafe. Amélie was everything Madison described. Elegant, multilingual, from a connected family. She was also bitter about Pierre's deceptions. He told people I left him because he wasn't ambitious enough, she said. The truth I discovered, he'd been using my family's name to get into exclusive events, claiming we were engaged when we weren't. He was thousands of euros in debt from trying to keep up appearances. She agreed to attend the wedding as my guest, not to cause drama, but as she put it, someone should be there who knows exactly who Pierre really is. 3 days before the wedding, I made my final preparations. The honeymoon suite at the chateau, I booked it in my name. The transportation for guests, upgraded at my expense. A photographer friend of Jake's who spoke French, hired to take some additional casual shots. Then, I did something that would have made Eleanor proud. I visited our safety deposit box and took out her wedding pearls, the ones Madison had always said she'd wear at her own wedding. The ones she hadn't asked for, probably because they weren't French enough. I had them cleaned and placed in a new velvet box with a note. Your mother wore these when she married a construction worker. They were good enough for her. Dad. I arranged for them to be delivered to Madison's room at the chateau the morning of the wedding. Everything was in place. The venue was ready. The secret guests were confirmed. The truth was prepared for its grand entrance. Like any good construction project, I'd laid the groundwork carefully. Now, all that remained was the execution. Madison thought she was getting a sophisticated French wedding, where her blue-collar father would be absent and unmissed. She was half right. I wouldn't be the father she was trying to hide. Instead, I'd be the father she never bothered to really know. In construction, we have a saying, measure twice, cut once. I'd done my measuring. The wedding was in 3 days. Time to make the cut. 2 days before the wedding, Madison and her bridal party flew to Paris. I knew their schedule because Marguerite had kept me informed. Madison had appointments at the finest boutiques, spa treatments at the Four Seasons, a rehearsal dinner at Le Jules Verne in the Eiffel Tower. Everything designed to impress Pierre's supposedly aristocratic circle. I'd made one final strategic move before their departure. For years, Madison had been an authorized user on my credit accounts. It was something Eleanor and I had set up when she left for Colombia. Emergency funds, shopping for necessities, the occasional splurge. Even after graduation, as Madison built her career at the nonprofit, I'd kept the arrangement. She was responsible with money, never abusing the privilege. Until now, when she apparently felt comfortable taking my money, while simultaneously uninviting me from the wedding, it was funding. The morning of her flight, I removed her as an authorized user on all accounts. Clean, simple, effective. The cards wouldn't be declined immediately. That would be too obvious. They'd work fine in New York, fine at the airport. But once she tried to use them in Paris at those exclusive boutiques, where they'd run international authorizations. That's when she'd discover the change. I waited. Patience was something construction had taught me. You couldn't rush concrete setting or foundation curing. Some things needed their own time to develop. The first text came at 2 p.m. Paris time 8 a.m. in New York. I was having coffee watching the sunrise when my phone buzzed. Dad, there's some confusion with the credit cards. Can you check with the bank? I didn't respond. Let her think it was a technical issue at first. An hour later, another text. The bank says I'm not authorized anymore. Must be a mistake. Please fix ASAP. I'm at Dior. Dior, where a handbag cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Still, I stayed silent. By noon, Paris time, the texts had turned to calls. I watched my phone ring Madison's contact photo. One from her college graduation, both of us smiling, lighting up the screen. Once, twice, 5 times in rapid succession. The voicemail started pleasant enough. Dad, there must be some mistake with the cards. I'm trying to buy shoes for the wedding. Call me back. Then confused. Daddy, please call me. This is embarrassing. Jessica had to pay for lunch because all my cards were declined. The progression to frustration was swift. Are you seriously doing this right now? I'm in Paris for my wedding. By evening, Paris time, she'd left 27 voicemails, each more frantic than the last. The final ones were barely controlled hysteria. I need access to the accounts. Pierre is asking questions. His friends think something's wrong. You're ruining everything. I listened to each message, hearing the panic creep into her voice. Not panic about the money itself. Madison had her own salary, her own savings. The panic was about appearances. How would it look to Pierre's circle if the American oil heiress couldn't buy whatever she wanted? If her billionaire father's cards were suddenly declined? The 27th message was different, quieter. She was crying. Daddy, please. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. Just please don't do this. Not now. Not during my wedding week. I'll explain everything when I get back. We can talk about the French thing. Just please turn the cards back on. The French thing. As if uninviting me was some minor scheduling conflict instead of a fundamental betrayal. Pierre must have noticed the meltdown, because I received a text from an unknown French number. Mr. Atlas, this is Pierre. Madison is quite upset about some banking confusion. As her father and a successful businessman, surely you can resolve this quickly. It's causing unnecessary stress during what should be a joyful time. I particularly enjoyed his assumption that he could manipulate me by appealing to my business sense. As if I'd built a company by being easily maneuvered. I finally responded, but not to Madison or Pierre. Instead, I texted Jessica, Madison's maid of honor, who'd been her roommate at Columbia. Jessica, please tell Madison that I'm restructuring my financial arrangements. The wedding remains fully paid for. She should enjoy her time in Paris. Neutral professional, giving away nothing. Jessica's response was immediate. Mr. A, what's going on? Maddie is losing it. She tried to buy a lipstick and her card was declined. A lipstick. The shame of it all. Imagine being reduced to using your own money for cosmetics. That evening, while Madison was dealing with her credit card crisis, I was having dinner with the Dubois parents who'd arrived that afternoon. I'd met them at their hotel. A modest but clean establishment I'd chosen specifically because it was authentic, not pretentious. Madame Dubois had brought pastries from their bakery, insisting I try their specialties. Monsieur Dubois spoke limited English, but made up for it with enthusiasm and warmth. They showed me photos of Pierre as a child covered in flour at the bakery, learning to shape dough at his father's side. We are so proud, Madame Dubois said in her accented English. Pierre, he works so hard, always ambitious. Sometimes too much, we think. He forgets where he comes from. The irony was razor sharp. Here were his parents, actual French people, worried their son had forgotten his working-class roots, while my daughter, desperate to pretend she belonged in a France that existed only in her imagination, had forgotten hers entirely. Your bakery, I said in French, watching their surprise. How long have you owned it? The floodgates opened. They told me about building their business, about community loyalties, about staying open during economic downturns, because neighbors depended on them, about teaching Pierre the value of hard work, though lately they worried he'd lost sight of those lessons. He tells us you own oil companies, Monsieur Dubois said carefully. Very impressive. We are simple people, but we hope to not embarrass at the wedding. My heart broke for them. These kind, hard-working people were worried about embarrassing their son, while their son was spinning lies about their life to impress a girl who was spinning her own lies right back. You could never embarrass anyone, I told them firmly. You've built something real with your hands. That's worth more than all the oil in Texas. They exchanged confused glances at the Texas reference but smiled gratefully. Meanwhile, my phone continued buzzing with increasingly desperate messages from Madison. She'd moved beyond voicemails to texts, each one more revealing than the last. Pierre's friends are asking questions. They want to go to a restaurant that's cash only. I don't have enough euros. Someone made a joke about Americans and credit cards. This is humiliating. If you're punishing me for the French thing, this is too much. I said I was sorry. Please. But the most telling message came near midnight. Fine, you win. I shouldn't have uninvited you. Is that what you want to hear? Now fix this. Not, I was wrong. Not, I'm sorry for hurting you. Just, you win. Like this was a game instead of a father being discarded by his daughter. I turned off my phone and went to bed. Tomorrow was the rehearsal dinner. Madison would have to navigate it without access to my accounts, forced to rely on either her own resources or Pierre's generosity. Given what I knew about Pierre's financial situation, that should prove interesting. I thought about Eleanor as I drifted off to sleep. What would she think of all this? Would she approve of my tactics? Then I remembered something she'd said when Madison was a teenager, going through a phase where she was embarrassed by our modest house, our ordinary cars. Let her feel the weight of her choices, Eleanor had said. Children need to understand that actions have consequences, especially when those actions hurt people who love them. 27 missed calls. 27 opportunities for Madison to realize what she'd thrown away. Not the money. That was just the mechanism. But the father who'd always been there, always supported her, always been proud of her. Until she decided he wasn't good enough for her new life. Tomorrow, the consequences would intensify. The wedding was in 36 hours, and Madison was about to learn that some things couldn't be fixed with a credit card, especially when that credit card had been declined. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear at Chateau de Villette. From my room in the chateau, not the honeymoon suite yet, that surprise would come later, I watched vendors scurrying about with final preparations. The gardens looked magnificent, white roses and lavender, creating an ethereal French countryside atmosphere. I'd maintained radio silence despite Madison's increasingly frantic attempts to reach me. The rehearsal dinner had apparently been a disaster. Jessica, feeling guilty about her role in the situation, had secretly texted me updates. Pierre paid, but he's furious. Made some comment about Americans not understanding money. Maddie cried in the bathroom twice. Good. Let her feel what it was like to be judged for who you are, or, in her case, who you were pretending to be. I dressed carefully in my tuxedo. Not rented, but a beautiful bespoke piece I'd had made in London years ago for a construction industry award ceremony. Eleanor had insisted I have at least one perfect suit. You never know when you'll need to show them who Atlas really is, she'd said. Today was that day. The first phase of my plan began early. I'd arranged with Marguerite for the Dubois parents to arrive before other guests to help with setup. In reality, I wanted them to see the full scope of what their son had claimed as his world. Mon Dieu, Madame Dubois whispered, taking in the opulent great hall with its crystal chandeliers and gold-leafed moldings. This is like Versailles. Your son has expensive tastes, I said gently in French. Monsieur Dubois frowned. Yes. We wonder sometimes where this comes from. We taught him to value work, not— He gestured helplessly at the extravagance. Parents can only teach. Children choose what to learn. They'd brought the croquembouche, transported in a refrigerated van I'd hired. The traditional tower of cream puffs was a masterpiece. 4 feet tall, spun with golden caramel, decorated with candied violets. It was the product of 3 days' work, made with love for their only son's wedding. "Where should we put it?" Madame Dubois asked nervously. "We don't want to disturb the other desserts." The other desserts were from a Michelin-starred pastry chef, each one a tiny architectural marvel that cost more than the Dubois family made in a day at their bakery. The contrast was heartbreaking. "Right in the center," I instructed the staff. "This is the wedding cake." As guests began arriving, I positioned myself strategically, where I could observe without being immediately seen. Madison's American relatives and friends were ushered to their seats, now in prime locations thanks to my rearrangement. My construction crew, looking uncomfortable, but determined in their formal wear, stuck together like a protective unit. Pierre's guests were interesting. Some were clearly genuine friends from his work, but others, the ones he'd built up as aristocracy, were obviously hired to play parts. I recognized the tells from years of dealing with contractors who weren't what they seemed. 2 perfect posture clothes that were costume-like, rather than lived in, the way they held champagne flutes like props. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Madison entered the preparation area, and I heard later from Jessica what happened when she found my gift. The pearls were delivered with my note, just as Madison finished having her hair styled. According to Jessica, she went completely still when she read it. Then she started crying. Not the pretty tears of a bride, but deep, wrenching sobs that required her makeup to be completely redone. She kept saying, "What have I done?" over and over, Jessica told me later. She wanted to call you, but by then, it was too late. The ceremony was starting. I took my seat as the music began. Madison would walk down the aisle alone as she'd planned for my absence. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd gotten exactly what she'd asked for. But then came my first surprise. As the wedding march began, I stood and walked to the back of the venue. Madison, waiting behind the closed doors for her cue, saw me through the gap. Her eyes widened in shock. I offered her my arm. "Daddy," she whispered, mascara already threatening to run. "But the email. I'm so sorry." "Every bride should have her father walk her down the aisle," I said simply. "If you'll have me." She gripped my arm like a lifeline, trembling. As the doors opened and we stepped into view, gasps rippled through the crowd. Pierre, standing at the altar, looked like he'd been slapped. His carefully constructed narrative of the absent American father crumbled in real time. But I wasn't done. As we walked, I spoke to Madison quietly, but in French, knowing Pierre's guests would hear, "Tu es belle, ma chérie. Ta mère serait si fière." Madison's step faltered. You speak French." 2 years in Quebec building shopping centers. You never asked." We reached the altar where Pierre waited, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and fear. I shook his hand, firmly the way American construction workers do, then took my seat in the front row. The ceremony proceeded in French as planned, but now there was a bilingual officiant who smoothly translated key moments. Pierre's jaw tightened each time English was spoken, his fantasy of a purely French affair cracking. Then came the second surprise. During the part where the officiant asks if anyone objects, the chateau doors opened again. Amélie Rousseau entered, Pierre's ex-girlfriend, elegant in understated couture. She didn't object. That would have been too crude. She simply took a seat on Pierre's side, her presence saying everything necessary. Pierre went pale. Several of his aristocratic friends shifted uncomfortably, recognizing her. One whispered urgently to another. The facade was crumbling. But the true revelation came during the reception. I stood to give the father of the bride speech, something Madison hadn't expected since she'd uninvited me. I began in English. Good evening. For those who don't know me, I'm Atlas Madison's father, the construction worker she was protecting you all from. Nervous laughter rippled through the American contingent. Pierre's guests looked confused, waiting for translations that were already being provided by the staff I'd arranged. I want to tell you about my daughter, the real one, not the one trying so hard to be someone else that she forgot who she is. I told stories. Madison at 5, insisting on wearing a hard hat to visit construction sites. Madison at 12 after her mother died, working beside me in the office to feel closer to Eleanor's memory. Madison at 16, tutoring kids in Brooklyn for free because everyone deserves to read. She was never ashamed of being a construction worker's daughter then. She was proud that her father built things that mattered. Schools, hospitals, homes where families made memories. Then I switched to French, watching Pierre's crowd lean in. But somewhere along the way, she decided that wasn't enough. That who we are, where we come from, was something to hide. So let me clear up some confusion. I gestured to the Dubois parents who looked terrified at the attention. These are Pierre's parents. They own Boulangerie Dubois in Lyon. They wake at 3 every morning to bake bread for their community. The croquembouche you'll enjoy tonight. They made it themselves with love for their son's wedding. They are the real French aristocracy. People who feed their neighbors, who build community with their hands. Madame Dubois was crying. Monsieur Dubois stood straighter, confusion giving way to pride. Pierre told them Madison came from oil money. Madison told me Pierre came from vineyard aristocracy. Both of them so busy creating fiction, they forgot that truth has its own beauty. I looked directly at Pierre, who seemed to be shrinking in his chair. I don't own oil companies. I own a construction firm worth $20 million. I earned every penny pouring concrete, framing walls, building dreams. Pierre doesn't come from nobility. He comes from bakers who taught him honest work, though he seems to have forgotten those lessons while accumulating 40,000 euros in debt, pretending to be someone else. Gasps from both sides of the room. Amélie raised her champagne glass slightly, a subtle toast to truth. So here's my wedding gift to the happy couple, honesty. The accounts are settled. This wedding is paid in full. But Madison's credit cards, those are cut off. Pierre's attempts to transfer vendor contracts to his name, denied. You want to build a life together. Build it on truth, not lies. Build it with your own hands, not someone else's money. I raised my glass. To Madison and Pierre. May they find the courage to be who they really are, not who they think they should be. And may they remember that the people who truly love them, whether bakers from Lyon or construction workers from Brooklyn, never needed them to be anything else. The toast was drunk in stunned silence. Madison was sobbing openly now, her carefully applied makeup streaming down her face. Pierre looked like he might bolt from his own reception. But the evening's surprises weren't finished. As dinner was served, the menu now perfectly balanced between French sophistication and American comfort, I made my rounds. At each table, I spoke in whichever language was appropriate, showing Madison's American friends that the embarrassing father spoke fluent French, while demonstrating to Pierre's guests that this simple construction worker could discuss wine art and philosophy with the best of them. The final blow came during the cake cutting. Pierre and Madison approached the Michelin-starred creations, but I stepped forward. Actually, tradition dictates the croquembouche should be served first. It's a symbol of community, each cream puff representing the friends and family who support the marriage. The Dubois parents beamed as their creation took center stage. Pierre had no choice but to serve his parents' humble masterpiece, while his aristocratic friends watched. Several of them, I noticed, seemed to genuinely enjoy it more than the fancy desserts. As the evening progressed, the careful segregation of guests dissolved. My construction crew ended up teaching Pierre's co-workers American drinking songs. The Dubois parents found themselves deep in conversation with my sister Carol about bread recipes. Madison's Columbia friends chatted with Pierre's genuine friends, Not the hired ones who had quietly slipped away. But Madison and Pierre sat frozen at their head table, watching their carefully constructed fantasy wedding transform into something real, messy, and honest. Exactly like life itself. I found Marguerite near the end of the reception. "The honeymoon suite," I said. "I'll be taking that tonight as planned." She smiled knowingly. "Of course, Monsieur Atlas. And the newlyweds. They'll have to figure that out themselves. First lesson of married life. You can't always get what you expect." As midnight approached, I made one last move. I'd arranged for the photographer to set up a special shot, not the staged perfect poses Madison had planned, but a real family photo. The Dubois parents, my construction crew, Madison's American friends, all mixed together. No separation by language or class or pretense. "Madison," I called out. "Time for a family photo, a real one." She came forward slowly, Pierre trailing behind. They looked young, suddenly, like children caught playing dress-up in their parents' clothes. "Daddy," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I got so caught up in being someone else." "Shh," I said, pulling her close. "We'll talk tomorrow. Tonight just be Madison Atlas. That's enough. That's always been enough." The photo was taken. A messy, imperfect gathering of real people who worked with their hands, who loved imperfectly, but honestly who built things that lasted. The Dubois parents stood next to me, our working-class solidarity, needing no translation. My construction boys grinned like the proud uncles they'd been to Madison her whole life. And in the center, two young people who'd tried so hard to be sophisticated that they'd forgotten the simple grace of truth. The reception ended without the grand send-off Madison had choreographed. Instead, guests drifted away in mixed groups. New friendships formed over shared recognition that pretense was exhausting, and authenticity, however humble, was precious. I retired to the honeymoon suite, leaving Madison and Pierre to face each other without their masks for the first time. Tomorrow would bring decisions about their marriage, their future, their willingness to build something honest from the rubble of their deceptions. But tonight, Atlas the construction worker had done what he did best. He'd taken an unstable structure built on lies and demolished it carefully, precisely making room for something better to be built in its place. Whether Madison and Pierre would build that something better, that was up to them. I'd given them the tools, truth, humility, and the example of parents who'd never needed to be anything other than what they were. The rest was their construction project to manage. I woke early in the honeymoon suite, the morning sun streaming through French doors that opened onto a balcony overlooking the chateau's gardens. Below, I could see the remnants of yesterday's reception. Chairs being stacked, tables cleared, the last evidence of Madison's fantasy wedding being quietly erased. My phone showed 32 missed calls from Madison and 5 from Pierre. There was also a text from Jessica. "They fought all night. Pierre blamed Maddie for not controlling you. She blamed him for lying about everything. They're in the lobby. She wants to see you." I took my time getting ready, then made my way downstairs. In the chateau's ornate lobby, I found them, still in their wedding clothes from yesterday, looking like they'd aged 5 years overnight. Madison's elaborate updo had collapsed, her designer dress wrinkled. Pierre's perfect facade had cracked completely, leaving a scared young man whose eyes darted nervously when he saw me. "Daddy." Madison stood when she saw me, mascara-stained and hollow-eyed. "Can we talk, please?" "Pierre should stay," I said. "Whatever needs saying involves both of you." We found a quiet corner in the breakfast room. Coffee was served, strong and black the way Eleanor and I used to drink it on Sunday mornings, while Madison played with her dolls at our kitchen table. Madison spoke first, her voice hoarse from crying. "I'm so sorry. I don't even know where to start. Mom would be so ashamed of me." "Your mother loved you unconditionally," I said. "But she also believed in truth. Remember what she used to say? Build on rock, not sand." "I built on sand," Madison whispered. "Everything with Pierre, all of it was..." "Lies," Pierre interjected, suddenly surprising us both. His accent was thicker when emotional. All lies. My parents. Did you see their faces when you introduced them? So proud of their bakery while I've spent 3 years telling people they owned estates. Why, I asked simply. Pierre's shoulders slumped. Because in Paris and New York, nobody cares about a baker's son. But aristocracy, that opens doors, gets you invited to parties introduced to the right people, like Madison. Madison flinched. You targeted me? No, I mean, not exactly. I knew you had money, yes. But I also... He struggled for words. You were so eager to be someone different, like me. We matched in our pretending. The honesty was brutal, but necessary. I watched my daughter absorb it, seeing clearly perhaps for the first time. The debt, she said. 40,000 euros. Is that real? Pierre nodded miserably. Living like nobility is expensive. I thought once we married with your father's money. My father's money was never yours to count on, Madison said with a flash of her old spirit. And after yesterday, there is no money. Is there, Dad? That depends, I said carefully, on what happens next. A knock interrupted us. Madame and Monsieur Dubois peered in nervously, still wearing their best clothes from yesterday. Pardonnez-nous, Madame Dubois began, but I waved them in. Your parents should hear this too, I told Pierre. What followed was painful, but cleansing. Pierre confessed everything to his parents in rapid French. The lies about their business, his debts, his shameful treatment of their honest work. His father's face went from confusion to hurt, to a deep, resigned disappointment that clearly cut Pierre more than any anger would have. We gave you everything, Monsieur Dubois said quietly. Not money, we didn't have that, but values, pride in honest work. You threw it away for what, to impress people who don't even know your real name? Papa, I'm sorry. And this beautiful girl, Madame Dubois turned to Madison, you lied to her too. Let her believe you were something you're not. The shame on both young faces was complete, but sometimes shame is the beginning of redemption. So, I said, taking control. The question is, what now you're married? That's legal fact. But what kind of marriage will it be? Madison and Pierre looked at each other, really, looked perhaps seeing clearly for the first time. I don't know who you are, Madison said to Pierre, and you don't know me, the real me. Maybe, Pierre started hesitantly, maybe we could find out without the lies. I pulled out a folder I'd brought with me. If you're serious about that, here's my proposal. Pierre, this is information about a debt consolidation program. You'll need to declare everything live on a strict budget, but you can be free of debt in 3 years if you're disciplined. Pierre took the papers with shaking hands. Madison. I continued, your trust fund from your mother becomes available when you turn 30, or when you demonstrate financial responsibility. I'm willing to release part of it early. Enough for a modest apartment, nothing fancy. But there are conditions. Anything, she said quickly. You both get jobs. Real jobs. Pierre, your parents mentioned needing help modernizing the bakery's business. Maybe your finance skills could actually serve honest work. Madison, there's a literacy nonprofit in Lyon that could use someone with your experience. Lyon. Madison blinked. You want us to move to France. Real France. Not the fantasy France of aristocrats and vineyard estates. The France where people work hard, raise families, bake bread for their neighbors. You want to be French. Learn from the Dubois family what that really means. Madame Dubois gasped. They would come to Lyon live near us. Only if you'll have them, I said. They need to learn what you already know, that there's no shame in honest work, only in pretending to be what you're not. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the proposal. Then Pierre did something unexpected. He stood, walked to his parents, and got on his knees. A very un-French display of emotion. Maman, Papa, I'm so sorry. I've been an idiot. A shameful, ungrateful idiot. Please, teach me again. Teach us both. His parents embraced him, tears flowing freely. Madison watched, then looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the little girl who used to build block towers in my office. "Daddy, could you visit us in Lyon? I want to learn French properly this time. Maybe you could teach me what you learned in Quebec." "I'd like that," I said, my own throat tight. The next hours were a blur of practical arrangements. The chateau bill was settled. Pierre's debts were documented properly. The Dubois parents overwhelmed, but Game began planning how to help the young couple start fresh in Lyon. At the train station, Madison clung to me like she hadn't since Eleanor's funeral. "I found them," she whispered. "Found what, sweetheart?" "Mom's pearls. I'm wearing them under my dress. I'm never taking them off. They'll remind me of who you really are, of who loved me when I was just Madison Atlas. Nothing more, nothing less." I kissed her forehead. "That's all you ever needed to be." Pierre approached, nervously extending his hand. "Monsieur Atlas, I know I have much to prove, but I promise I will take care of her. Honestly this time." I shook his hand. Still firm, still American. "Take care of each other. And remember, I know excellent private investigators. I'll be checking in." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I would expect nothing less from a protective father. As their train pulled away, the Dubois parents flanking me, I felt Eleanor's presence strongly. Our daughter had lost her way, but she'd found it again. Not the easy path of inherited wealth and false sophistication, but the harder road of building something real with your own hands. 6 months later, I received a video from Lyon. Madison, flower in her hair, was helping in the bakery at 4 a.m. Pierre was serving customers, chatting easily in French and broken English with tourists. They looked tired, real, and somehow younger than they had in their wedding finery. "Papa Atlas." Madison called out in French, much improved from her lessons. "We're learning. The Dubois teach us everything. Pierre's debt is reducing. I started a reading program for immigrant children. And look." She held up her hand. Eleanor's pearls were now accompanied by a simple gold band, replacing the ostentatious engagement ring. We had a second ceremony. Pierre added, appearing in frame. "Just family. No lies. Your sister Carol came and your construction friends. We served only bread and wine from the bakery. It was perfect." "When will you visit?" Madison asked. "I want to show you our apartment. It's tiny, but it's ours. We paid the deposit ourselves." "Soon," I promised. "I've got some construction projects to finish first." And I did visit often. Each time I watched them grow more into themselves, the real selves they'd almost lost in pursuit of an illusion. The bakery modernized with Pierre's help, but kept its soul. Madison's reading program expanded, serving 3 neighborhoods. They were building something together, brick by brick, day by day. On what would have been Eleanor's 60th birthday, Madison called with news. "We're pregnant," she said, joy and terror mixing in her voice. "Due in December. If it's a girl—" "Eleanor," I finished. "She'd like that." "Dad, will you teach the baby about construction? About building things that last?" "Every chance I get," I promised. As I hung up, I looked at the photo on my desk. The messy, imperfect family picture from the wedding reception. Construction workers and bakers, American and French, all mixed together in honest chaos. In the center, 2 young people who'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that you can't build a life on lies, no matter how beautiful they seem. But you can rebuild on truth, no matter how humble it appears. That's what Atlas had always known, what Eleanor had always believed, and what Madison had finally learned. Sometimes the best gift a father can give his daughter isn't a fairy tale wedding or unlimited credit cards. Sometimes it's the chance to fail, to fall, and to find the strength to build herself back up. Honestly, truly, with her own hands. That's the only construction project that really matters in the end. Looking back, would I do it all again? Every phone call, ignored every credit card, canceled every careful demolition of their fantasy. In a heartbeat. Because now, in a small bakery in Lyon, my daughter needs bread at dawn beside her husband and his parents. She speaks French with a Brooklyn accent. She wears her mother's pearls with flower-dusted hands. She's building a life worth living, not a lie worth maintaining. And that's worth more than all the fairy tale weddings money could buy. So I turn to you now, dear listeners. Have you ever had to choose between comfortable lies and difficult truths? Between maintaining appearances and honoring who you really are? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to hear more. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that where we come from isn't something to hide. It's the foundation for where we're going. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May you always have the courage to be exactly who you are. And may you raise children who never forget that truth is the strongest foundation of all. Until next time, this is Atlas reminding you to build wisely, build honestly, and build with love.